When I bought my first DSLR, one of my biggest concerns was figuring out which lens to buy. So like most people, I went onto YouTube, I joined some Facebook photography groups, and the most common response to the question what lens to buy or best lens to get to this camera was, well, what are you planning to shoot? And though that question is very good and is a very valid question, it really didn't help me at the time. I didn't know if I was going to be into street photography or portraiture or landscape photography. So fast forward to almost 4 years to today, after lots of actual practice and more research, I've slowly built up a small collection of lenses over time. Now, this is in no way going to be an in-depth review or comparison of each of these lenses, but I wanted to give the total beginner who, like me, when I started out, who didn't have a clue as to the kind of photography you'd be into, kind of an insight into why you would probably want to use one lens over the other. So let's start with the very first lens I purchased outside of the kit lens that came with my camera. And that is the Canon 50mm f1.8 STM lens. Now, I admit when I purchased this lens, I had no idea how great it was. I was just really looking for a lens that had the widest aperture available at the price point that I could afford. And during that time, this lens just cost a little over 5,000 pesos or 100 USD. And I think today it's still around the same price range. I was going to get lots of background blur at an aperture f1.8, and I wasn't going to be spending too much, so it was such a steal that I decided to buy it immediately. I really enjoyed shooting with this lens a lot. I use it for street photography, travel photography, portraiture. In fact, if you research more about this lens, you'll find that a lot of photographers would actually say that this is one of the most underrated lenses that each photographer should have in their kit. After 2 years of shooting with my Canon, my wife decides to gift me a new Sony camera to replace my old one. And though I had no intentions of transferring from one brand to another, I was open to the idea of having a smaller, lighter, and more compact setup. And so we gave the Sony a6400 a chance. And the first lens I bought this time around was the 35mm f1.8. The main reason why I wanted to shoot with a 35mm lens this time, despite me loving shooting at 50mm, was because I learned about how crop sensors affected the actual focal length of lenses that you attach to them. Now, at 35mm with a multiplier of 1.5, I will get around 52.5mm of focal length. I use it for the same things that I was using the 50 with: street photography, travel photography, portraiture, with a little bit of an advantage in street photography and travel, just because of the wider focal length, you're able to bring a little bit more of the background into the frame, and you're able to give a little bit more context into your shots. Now, that's not to say that I don't use my 50 anymore. In fact, I love that lens so much, I even bought a lens adapter so that I could use it with my Sony camera when I was feeling nostalgic, or generally when I just want to see the kind of photos that I could take with that lens versus my new sets of lenses. Another lens I decided to purchase was the Sigma 60mm f1.4 lens. Now, the biggest selling factor is that aperture. f1.4 was going to be the widest aperture lens that I was going to own. And I was so excited to be able to take photos at that range. During the time, we were starting to travel a lot more now. And at 60mm in that wide of a focal length, landscape photography, architectural photography, and probably some night shots were going to be so much better. Also, even though it really wasn't my concern at the time, I was thinking it was going to be perfect for vlogging. It was going to be easier to turn my camera towards my face and fit myself into the frame, as opposed to if I was using the 35 or a 50. And if you research more about this lens online, I don't think you'll even find a single bad review. And to me, that just even makes it such a great purchase. One of my favorite lenses to shoot with is this Viltrox 85mm f1.8 lens. Now, I was so curious as to why people seem to love taking portraits at 85mm, because at the back of my mind I was thinking I was already a little bit further away from my subject at 50, so how much further away was I going to be at 85? However, when I started shooting with it, I immediately fell in love with it. The photos on this lens was really sharp. The background blur is amazing. The bokeh at night is so creamy. And because of the mere fact that I was just further away from my subject, the kind of photos and composition I was able to make with this lens was just so new and refreshing. I usually ended up taking candid photos of my subjects with people passing in the foreground. It was just an all-around different experience. The biggest lens I own is this Tamron 70-300 F4-5.6 lens. I bought this back in 2017 when we were first going to Europe. Because at the back of my mind, I knew I wasn't going to be able to visit all the sites or pay for entrance fees to all of the tourist spots. And I wanted to be able to take photos of details of architecture without having to be too close to them. And so a zoom lens was the way to go. This 70-300 paired with a crop sensor camera meant that it was gonna zoom in even further, which made it perfect for what I wanted to use it for. One thing to note about this lens though is its aperture. At f4 and 5.6 in the widest apertures, it really won't give you much of a performance in low light conditions. That being said, I was really only using it during the day anyway. Now the last lens I own is this 18-55mm f3.5 to 5.6 lens. It's actually the kit lens that came with my Canon DSLR. And admittedly, I don't use this as much anymore, but that's not to say that it isn't any good. Despite having an aperture of f3.5, I was able to use it to shoot this entire talking head clips of myself for this video. At a focal length of 18-55, it's actually one of the most versatile lenses out there. At 18mm, it's wide enough so I can shoot some architecture and landscape photography. I can even use it for some vlogging. And then, if I want to, I can zoom in at 35mm, which is a focal length I love shooting at so much for some portraits and street photography. And then if I need to zoom in a little bit further, then I have the option to do so at 55mm. Now you really just need to take note of its aperture, because at f3.5 and 5.6, it's really not going to give you a good low light performance. However, if you do know that you're going to be shooting outdoors and during the day most of the time anyway, then the 80-55 lens is really more than a capable enough lens. Don't let anyone say otherwise. So in conclusion, I want to say that lenses are indeed an investment, and doing your necessary research is an important part of the process. However, I don't think you need to buy all of the lenses out there or try and cover all of the focal lengths available. Like me, even though I have all of these lenses, I typically only bring at least 1 to 3 at a time. And even then, I might only use just 1 to 2 most of the time. And the last thing I want to say is that even though you don't have any ideas of the kind of photography that you want to do right now, then trial and error is indeed a good way to learn. However, I'm hoping that through my own experiences, my own trials and errors, and the things I've shared here, that you learn a thing or two and understand as to why you would probably want one lens over the other.